Welcome back. Thanks for joining me again. So we're going to jump now into Lambda basics. We're going to go through definitions of Lambda and we'll go through a general overview of serverless computing. So let's go ahead and take a look at our definition first. So our essentials definition is that Lambda is serverless computing. It is the next generation of cloud computing that will replace EC2 instances for the most part. So Lambda allows us to execute or run code without having to worry about the underlying server. So what we mean by that is that typically in order to run code, we would provision an EC2 instance and install our application or our code onto that EC2 instance. With Lambda, we don't have to provision a server. Instead, all we have to worry about is what code we want to run. And we're able to execute that code without ever having to worry about managing a server. The AWS definition is that AWS Lambda is a compute service that lets you run code without provisioning or managing servers. AWS Lambda executes your code only when needed and scales automatically from a few requests per day to thousands per second. You pay only for the compute time you consume. There is no charge when your code is not running. With AWS Lambda, you can run code for virtually any type of application or backend service, all with zero administration. AWS Lambda runs your code on a high availability compute infrastructure and performs all of the administration of the compute resources, including server and operating system maintenance, capacity provisioning, and automatic scaling, code monitoring, and logging. All you need to do is supply your code in one of the languages that AWS supports. So the AWS definition is actually a lot. So let's go ahead and take our definition and break it down into smaller chunks by taking a look first at what we've done so far over the last few sections. So we had our web servers, and our web servers are processing our code, which our code is basically just the Apache test page. And we're able to present this code from the EC2 instances that are residing in subnets, that are residing in availability zones, and being balanced by our elastic load balancer and our autoscaling group. And then, of course, we use Route 53 to register our domain name, and the DNS resolves our domain name, projectomega2.com, to our elastic load balancer. Our customers or users are able to then come through the internet and are able to access the elastic load balancer and receive the code from our individual web servers. And our autoscaling group allows us to scale up and scale down to provide the code from our web servers. So let's go ahead and take a look at an oversimplification of how Lambda works. So Lambda essentially replaces almost all of that. So we don't need the individual EC2 instances. We don't need autoscaling groups. We don't have to worry about managing subnets and availability zones or virtually any of the networking. We do still need, however, to manage the DNS information. So our Route 53 settings and information for DNS are still required in order for users to be able to be routed to the elastic load balancer. But virtually all of the other configuration is managed by Lambda. Now, again, this is really an oversimplification of how this works, but it does give you a good idea about how Lambda functions. So think of your own computer. On your computer, if you had one application running on your computer, more than likely you would have way more processing power than you need to execute that one application. But what if you needed to process 30 applications or 50 applications? That probably is too much for your computer processor to handle. So as a result, you may need to purchase an additional computer to help process those applications. Well, in AWS, we would purchase additional EC2 instances. But with the way that Lambda works, Lambda is able to scale and provide enough processing power to actually allow that code to run for those 40 applications without us having to do any management of the servers that are actually running the code. We don't have to manage the operating system. We don't have to set up the infrastructure. We don't have to do any of that. all of those tasks are managed for us by AWS as part of the services that are provided by Lambda. And you can execute the Lambda code as many or as few times as necessary. You only pay for Lambda based on what you actually use. So you're not going to have to worry about how many EC2 instances you're going to need to provision, or do I need to make an auto-scaling group, or really any of the actual configuration that's required to run our EC2 instances. And because all of that's managed by Lambda for you, the only thing you have to worry about is how to execute your code on Lambda and how much it will cost you to execute that code. So let's go ahead and take a look at our pricing information now. So there is free tier usage available for Lambda. In general, for Lambda, you're charged based on the request to execute code, the duration or length of time it takes the code to execute, and potentially Lambda may be accessing other AWS services, and you may incur charges as a result of that. But for the most part, your charges for Lambda are going to be based on the number of requests to execute the code and how long it takes for that code to execute. It's really important to understand how Lambda charges you for the execution of code. So if you have a Lambda code that takes 3 seconds to execute, then you're only charged for that 3 seconds. Now, as with the other AWS services, before you do any major usage of Lambda, you should review the current pricing model for AWS to make sure you understand exactly what you'll be required to pay. So with that, let's go ahead and wrap up Lambda basics. So the single most important thing that you take away from this lesson is that Lambda is serverless computing. You don't have to manage any EC2 instances, auto-scaling groups, or any other configuration, as all of that is done for you. With Lambda, because it's serverless, the only thing you have to manage is the code that you want Lambda to execute. So that concludes this lesson on Lambda basics. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.